We're so thrilled today to be here with Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is truly a gadol, just a great mensch and scholar for the Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people, who is bringing breadth and depth to global Jewry, and in terms of both Jewish continuity and in terms of our mandate to foster justice in the world. And I view him as just a model rabbi to learn from. And it's great to see so many of you here and to be here with our great partners, Temple Solel, who have been very, very close partners. I see Rabbi Linder and Rabbi Steele and our friend Peter Pishko and others from that community. So thank you for your partnership always. And I see many other rabbis here who are joining. I see my friend Rabbi Asher Lopatin, Rabbi Avi Urlo, others who are joining. I'm sorry if I missed somebody who's here as well. And we're so excited to learn from you. And our topic, Just Judaism, Understanding the Centrality of Social Justice. We're going to have the chance to hear from Rabbi Rick Jacobs for 30, 40 minutes as he wishes, and then a chance for some back and forth, some Q&A, and to end at the hour, 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague and friend, Rabbi John Linder, to do the formal intro today.
Thanks, Rabbi Shmuley. Appreciate it. And I do have to say, Rabbi Lopatin, it's been a long time since I've seen you in Chicago. It's really wonderful to be on with you. So here is the bio that I was given to introduce Rabbi Jacobs. Rabbi Rick Jacobs is president of the Union for Reform Judaism, the most powerful force in North American Jewish life. The URJ leads the largest and most diverse Jewish movement in North America, reaching more than 1.5 million people through nearly 850 congregations, 15 overnight camps, the Reform Teen Movement NFTY, and the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. So I am going to, Rabbi Jacobs, now take the privilege as the co-host to add this anecdote because I can't help it. As I was a first-year student in Jerusalem, you were the senior rabbi of Westchester Reform, and you were part of our orientation, first-year rabbinic schools in Jerusalem. And in the Moedom, beautiful, beautiful day, you shared a little bit of your story that before becoming a rabbi, you were a professional dancer. And here's what I remember about that your Devar Torah incorporated, it was an embodied Devar Torah, actually using movement. And I, in that moment, Rabbi Jacobs, knew that you could be a powerful rabbi and leader by grace, by the grace of your movement, and by your backbone that you are for this movement. And I think it is surely the combination of that grace and backbone perfect in talking about the centrality of social justice. And you can both be a strong leader and a mensch of mensches. And that is you, Rabbi Jacobs. So it's to you, my friend.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
My mom would say, quit while you're ahead. I should just say thank you. And we go off to our days to both my rabbis and friends, Rav Shmuley and Rav John. Thank you for that gracious and warm introduction. And frankly, Shmuley, when you reached out and said, would you come? Basically, you could have asked anything. I would have said, yes, you are one of my heroes and teachers, and Rabbi Linder as well. I'm looking on the screen. You know, Rabbi Asher Lopatin, God bless you, and Kol HaKavod, what happened yesterday, Am Yisrael standing together. And I look around, there are other people who I know that I've worked closely with and really love this opportunity to learn together. So by this point in the universe, you know what to do with the chat. So I would actually encourage you, if there's things that are on fire. By the way, Rabbi Shimon Brand, wow. One of my just favorite teachers from the Hartman Institute, who just is the embodiment as well. So Rav Shimon, what a treat to have you and all of you. So if you have something you want to say, put it in the chat. We'll have a chance to, have conversation, discussion. But, my style usually is that things will grow out of the, the course of the text and the learning. And if you put something in the chat, it may just be that it triggers and I can pull it right in as we're moving. So I'm going to share my screen and take us on a little journey together. Here we go. Ready, aim, fire. So it kind of like Just Jewish by itself is a bit of a play, because you obviously know all the different demographers keep saying, you know, which category are you? Are you Orthodox? Are you conservative, Reform? No, I'm just Jewish. But I actually love it because it has content. It's not just, I'm just Jewish, but justice is core to how I think of my Judaism. So I'm going to start with a story that's actually a true story. I was invited to debate one of the candidates for Chief Rabbi of Israel in the Knesset. And in the course of that conversation with, actually, this person did not win. It would have been, I think, wonderful if the person had won. The rabbi said, Rabbi Jacobs, you made up Tikkun Olam, in part of the talk. And I thought to myself, come on. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, maybe you should just call my mom, tell my mom that I made up, and the Reform movement made up Tikkun Olam, because she would really be impressed. She probably would believe it. But to be truthful, I can't imagine how in the world anyone could say that Tikkun Olam or Tzedek Chavrati or social justice is not fundamental to what it means to be a person of Jewish commitment. So I want to take you through not just an answer to a question in the Knesset, but just a thing that's become a bit of a debater's point today, which is social justice really in the aorta of Jewish life? Or is it this thing that, you know, progressive Jews have kind of added on and made it into a religion in and of itself? So first off, I wanted to say that I put these 4 quadrants here because they represent, in my mind, and probably yours as well, 4 core ways one could live Jewish commitment. So can we just belabor the obvious? You can put it into the chat. You could name all of them. On the upper left, you have tefillah, prayer. The bottom left, you have limud Torah, Jewish learning, of course. Bottom right, gimilut chasadim, acting with chesed to one another. And in the top quadrant, the right quadrant, Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, the first president of the URJ, then the UHC, marching with Dr. King, Dr. Heschel, Ralph Abernathy, amazing group. Social justice is as fundamental. But in today's world, if someone says, I want to start, I'm not a deeply involved person when it comes to Judaism, where should I start? Anyone would say, well, start with Jewish learning, or maybe start with a holiday, start with Shabbat, start doing something, on a regular basis, or maybe start with more acts of kindness. When you say, well, maybe start with social justice, you say, well, that's not really where you want to start. So again, the point isn't where you want to start. The point is, does everything interconnect? And I think everything does interconnect. And, if you start with one, the hope is you can add others and you can have something that's woven together in a beautiful, seamless way. It's not an accident that the Parsha Devarim, the first of our Parshas in Deuteronomy, has a Haftarah for this coming weekend, which is very, very weighty because we have Tisha B'Av. But when people say, you Reform Jews, you made up, or maybe Rav Shmuley, maybe you made up social justice. I mean, we can't take that credit. I mean, if anybody's put a lot of social justice wisdom, and even in book form, you've done that magnificently. This Haftarah, like if someone thinks like that, Rabbi Linder or Rabbi Louis Cameras wrote this is Isaiah. And what I love about it is it sets into context social justice. So for example, it starts off with the idea of holidays and new moon observances. God says they fill me with loathing. They're a burden. I can't take it. Why? Because when you lift up your hands in prayer, I'm going to turn my eyes away. Though you pray endlessly, I'm not listening because your hands are stained with blood, with injustice. And what's the teaching? Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. devote yourselves to justice, aid the wrong, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow. This is what it means. So what's the text saying? It's saying not that prayer is meaningless, but if it doesn't have the impetus to live and act more justly, then it's empty. And if you bring, bloody hands and impure, society and deeds into prayer, it's not going to work. So I think Isaiah is screaming, make your Judaism integrated and don't leave out this core. And particularly reading this before Tisha B'Av, wow, what a powerful reminder that when we don't have a just society, what is it that happens? Everything unravels. And to be a devout student of Torah, a devout practitioner of Jewish prayer and Jewish observance of holidays, without something as fundamental as commitment to justice, it's not efficacious. It's not what we're about. So let me just take you through. And by the way, if we think it's just Isaiah, no. It's all over. It's all over the Torah. It's all over Tanakh, and it's particularly all over the prophets. This very famous teaching from Amos, in some ways a theme similar to Isaiah. I hate your festivals, your prayer offerings, your burnt offerings. I'm not going to pay attention. Spare me all of it. Just let justice well up like waters, righteousness like an unfailing stream. This is a major pillar of Judaism then, now, and going forward. This is not made up. This is not added on. This is in the heart. Some of you may know Rabbi David Saperstein, truly, one of the real Gedolim of our world, spoke unbelievably powerfully yesterday at the rally in Washington. And David has this beautiful description of social justice, and it's worth just hearing it. The thread of social justice is so authentically and intricately woven into the many-colored fabric we call Judaism that if you seek to pull that thread out, the whole fabric unravels. That the Judaism that results is distorted, it's neutered, it's rendered aimless. Rabbi Saperstein spoke the truth. And what about Rabbi Heschel? We know, all of us, many Heschel quotes. This one to me is in the very core of what Abraham Joshua Heschel did in his life. Prayer is meaningless unless it is subversive, unless it seeks to overthrow and ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehoods. For Heschel, you could not separate your prayer life, your study life, from the wider demands of society. And I'll just say, the photograph there is the Shabbat after George Floyd was murdered. After tefillah in the morning, literally, we took to the streets with social distance in the march, but it felt critical that if we were going to pray in the morning, and there was a gathering of such strength, if you're New Yorkers, you can tell that's 6th Avenue. It was critical for me to pray, to gain the strength, the balance, the rootedness, but then to act. And yes, on Shabbat it felt particularly important, that Shabbat. I also think this is theological. Sometimes we think of, it's kind of political Judaism. For people who don't like to be really seriously Jewish, just take a little Democratic Party or a little Republican Party platform, put it together, and you can make a nice thing. No. This is fundamental to who we understand God to be. And I always just remind myself that we worship a God who is impatient with injustice. It's not just we are impatient or we're agitated, but God is deeply, deeply concerned. And of course, one of the great moments is the argument with Avraham and God over the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, you have this moment where Abraham, in a sense, is reflecting to God. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Well, the judge of all the earth, you're not going to do justly. Kind of reminding God through the teacher Abraham, and so powerfully. That dynamic to be both called to justice and to be inspired by the Holy One. And the dominant narrative, of course, for all of us is the Exodus narrative, where God literally hears the cry, hears the pain of the Israelites, and leads God to help Moshe to lead us out. So God, in a sense, feels the pain, the suffering, the injustice, and is motivated to move us to be those agents of justice in the world. I'm ambivalent to put some Pew up in front of us, because I think we're so obsessed with Pew. If we spent half the time we spent arguing over the Pew study and just spent it studying Torah, we'd be so much better off. But I do have to want to put this one slide up, because it's the slide that says, what did Jews most identify as core to being Jewish? And of course, look at the top of the thing, remembering the Shoah, the Holocaust, of course, leading ethical, moral life. What's number 3? Working for justice and equality. That it's still way, way up there. Intellectual, curious. You have to get down to the bottom. And I'm not proud or happy about this list, but observing Jewish law and eating, Jewish food, that those are at the bottom, below having a good sense of humor. It kind of makes us all want to cry. But let's pay attention to where a lot of our Jewish community starts, what's core and fundamental. And by the way, I think remembering the Holocaust is also a justice imperative. I remember I had the privilege of speaking after Elie Wiesel at the Darfur rally in the 2000s, and his message was very powerful. He said, never again doesn't mean never again only for the Jewish people. It means never again for any of God's children. And so I think the Holocaust can be also one of those motivators and reminders that justice is the ultimate imperative that we create, where there will be no genocide. And as of yesterday, the beautiful rally, and there will be no anti-Semitism, and there'll be no, and no, and no. So again, I think this is a reminder of where people are. So if people already have the justice imperative, the equality imperative, how do we build a meaningful Jewish life around that? Start with that, build it, support it with learning, support it with spiritual practice, prayer, support it with acts of kindness, build a whole infrastructure for Jewish life, not justice by itself, but justice interconnected. And if that's where a person and most people are to start, let's start there. It's an absolute fundamental of our Jewish tradition. Start where people are, not where you want. Did we lose me on video, or is that just someone, is this Pam just direct messaging?
No, I think we all did.
Oh, so that I must have just, yeah, there we go. Thank you, Pam. All right, so repeat everything I just said for the last few minutes. So here we go. Hopefully you didn't.
We did hear you, Rabbi.
Okay, good. Well, there's nothing to look at. And hopefully, even with the description, you got some of the essence. So thank you. I should be careful where I'm clicking. So here is a moment where I know we're always worried about young people. Are they going to care as much as we do? Are they going to do as much? This was one of the most powerful moments for me. And I think you can recognize that Natan Sharansky, this is Natan Sharansky's last Jewish agency meeting. And for the first time, Natan brought a resolution about the asylum seekers. And it was unusual for the Jewish agency to even consider making a statement about the injustice for asylum seekers in Israel. So he had a discussion, and the usual suspects spoke. I said a few words, others did. And he was about to take a vote on whether we would raise the Jewish agency's voice. And then one of our young 20-somethings who had been invited, she's a Reform Jew from actually Los Altos Hills, California. She was raising her hand, but Natan couldn't see her because she was sitting behind Natan. And so Natan loves young people. So I pointed to her. And so Natan said, would you like to say something? She said, I really would. So Natan got up, gave her his seat. She sat down, and she gave a lesson about social justice to this group of 100 Jewish leaders from across the denominational spectrum. And she said, how is it possible that given our Torah's imperative and our history, that we would not raise our voice for the asylum seekers who have sought refuge in this country. It is a busha. It is an absolute embarrassment. And then she quoted the teaching from Exodus. You should know the nefesh hager, kigarim ha'item be'eretz Mitzrayim. You should know the heart. You should know what it's like. And she finishes, and honestly, the vote, I am sure before she spoke would have been opposed. After she spoke, the Jewish agency, I think for the first time in my recollection, raised its voice, a moderate, a refined, a clear voice. And social justice also, sometimes in some places, in some settings, is thought to be, it's too controversial. People will get upset. But you know what? I don't think Isaiah, Amos, and Jeremiah were upset if people were a little bent out of shape. If there's a righteous cause, we're better off being a little bent out of shape than having our world built on a false foundation. So this is where she was out protesting in South Tel Aviv, and still an issue. And again, I know probably on the Zoom call today, we probably fall on different parts of different political issues. I'm just arguing that you can't study a text like that. You can't come to a Jewish principle and not see it reflected in the world around us. This is a group, we do a thing in Washington, D.C. when we're not in COVID called Litaken. We take teens from all over North America and we come to Washington, D.C. and help them gain learning to underpin their social justice advocacy. Here they are advocating on behalf of dreamers. So again, I think that this is a powerful way to express fundamentals of Jewish tradition and Jewish commitment. All of us, I think, have come to know and love the Abraham Heschel quote about praying, with our feet, which again is a slightly different text as Susanna remembers her dad. But actually, I wouldn't doubt that Rabbi Heschel knew that Frederick Douglass actually, almost a century earlier had this. He said, "I prayed for 20 years, but received no answer until I prayed with my legs." So I love that maybe these two giants of social justice might have actually, exchanged, not actually, Douglass couldn't have known and learned from Dr. Heschel, but it certainly is the case. He could have drawn his inspiration from Douglass and from all of us. Sometimes you got to actually get out and take your stand like we did yesterday. You can't just talk, you can't just write. Sometimes you actually have to create facts on the ground. Rav Shmuley, I think you exemplified that in the most powerful way every day. We march for a lot of things. And I also want to say that when we march for justice, we oftentimes stand with people who don't agree exactly with us. That happened yesterday too, and I'm proud that it did. If we're part of big justice coalitions, we're going to stand with people who may not come out exactly where we do on critical issues. That's okay. But we have to actually still get out. And Reverend Barber has been a powerful leader for justice. And, and again, there may be issues that Reverend Barber speaks about that the entire Jewish community doesn't line up around, but where can we line up? Like yesterday, we lined up around anti-Semitism. We have lots of differences, but on that, we stand united. I would just say this on the bottom left, you may recognize that's our long struggle to create an egalitarian space at the Western Wall. Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value. I know that's agitational for some people. It's core to be able to stand up for a society that fights racism in all of its forms. So sometimes you got to actually show up. I love the beautiful reminder that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had on her Supreme Court chambers wall. She had reminders because for her, tzedek tirdof was not a clever quotation from Torah. It was something that animated her life every day. And so she has this beautiful teaching that she gave actually a talk at the US Holocaust Memorial in 2004. And she said, "My heritage as a Jew and my occupation as a judge fit together symmetrically. The demand for justice runs through the entirety of Jewish history and Jewish tradition. I take pride in and draw strength from my heritage. As signs in my chambers attest, large silver mezuzah on my doorpost, a gift from the Shulamite School for Girls in Brooklyn, where she attended. On 3 walls, an artist's renditions of Hebrew letters, a command from Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. Those words are ever-present reminders of what judges must do that they may thrive. That's the extension of the quote. So I love that she really saw that as an animating daily principle of what she did. Again, she wasn't a dayan in a Jewish setting. She was a judge for, the most powerful and sometimes the most challenging country on the planet. On your own time, you can look at some of the beautiful nuances about how we understand that. But I would just share that a few weeks ago, I was able to be in Jerusalem, and Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who leads the Reform Movement, is a brilliant attorney, has argued many cases in the Supreme Court. He had to conclude his time leading the Reform Movement because now he's a member of Knesset. So I gave him this beautiful paper cut of Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, and I said, please put it on your walls, because you will be like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You will be someone who every day goes into the Knesset and fights for these principles. And I think for all of us, for some, it's almost cliche to say tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, but it actually is the thing we run after. It doesn't get handed to us. It's not a permanent possession. It's not a permanent fixture of our legal system or our countries or even our Jewish communities, but it is core to what it means to be people of faith. For us, I know many of us in Jewish life, there's an imperative, and I think it's most powerfully expressed in Nitzavim towards the end of Deuteronomy, right? Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. You stand today, all of you, not some of you, all of you. And who are the people, in case we would forget? Your children, your wives. Okay, it obviously was a group of men writing that or reframing that text, but the stranger, the wood chopper, the water drawer, everyone. Well, we think also about the injustice of our Jewish community, not necessarily including everyone, and particularly Jews of color, LGBTQ plus Jews, Jews who are challenged in different ways. Who are those people? And that's an imperative injustice. So sometimes we're out busy in, righting the wrongs of the unjust world, but some of these injustices are in our communities. They're in our synagogues, they're in our Jewish institutions. And how do we actually really live that quality of kulchem, every single one, no exceptions, no one left out? That's an imperative. For us in the Reform Movement, we have an amazing teacher. There are many teachers who are giving this beautiful Torah every day. Yolanda Savage-Narva, who is professionally at the URJ, she directs our READY work, racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and thinking about, what she's doing, whether it's training, whether it's making sure that we're leading with our best example, who's on our board, who's representing us in Jewish communal discourse, and to really kind of hold ourselves accountable to be our best, most inclusive self. That's a justice imperative today. It's not, some people say, oh, that's just an inclusion thing. It's a justice question. And we can't very well win and fight broad societal injustices if we're not willing to hold the mirror up and do it in our communities, in our own hearts, in our own lives, in powerful ways. Some of you may know that the Voting Rights Act was drafted on the table on the left. Obviously, you see John Lewis at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Zichrono Livracha, blessed memory. And then you have that table, that iconic table at the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., where the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Bill were drafted. And in that photograph, you have Nick Cannon doing a recording with Rabbi Jonah Pesner and Yolanda Savage-Narva, and with Evan Traylor and Rabbi Esther Letterman, really powerful, and Dieter Reiser as well. So for us, justice is not just an internal Jewish thing. We also have an obligation and an opportunity to bring that justice. Texas today and tomorrow, addressing the voting rights issues, really fundamental to us. And for us in the Reform Movement, and I think that's true for the Orthodox, many in the Orthodox community, conservative and Reconstructing Judaism, what is it that we do? How do we raise our voice in Washington, in our state capitals, in our local communities? And how do we get people active? And so for us, the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, these are real things and needs us to do this work. And I love that, we all can have a doorway in. And sometimes when we raise our voices together across all the different lines of division, when we are able to find that common ground, sometimes the earth moves in powerful ways. I love that Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs and Isabel Wilkerson in some ways teach some similar Torah. And I love that in our diversity, I mean, look at Rabbi Sachs, who just, what a brilliant teacher and embodiment of Torah in the dignity of difference. One belief more than any other is responsible for the slaughter of individuals on the altars of the great historical ideals is the belief that those who do not share my faith or my race or my ideology do not share my humanity. And at best, they are second-class citizens. At worst, they forfeit the sanctity of life itself. These are things that demonize other human beings. And Isabel Wilkerson says, tolerance is such a low bar. I mean, you tolerate, the slush in the winter in the crosswalk. You tolerate a rattle in your car engine. You tolerate mosquitoes in the summer. When it comes to our core work, these are imperatives. These are not aiming to tolerate one another, but to love and to fight for one another's basic dignity and well-being. I want to just, hold on, I think I just made one too many. I also think our history is a call to justice. In this remarkable book, Caste, if you haven't read it, she has so many teachings, and the connection between Nazi Germany and the United States, in terms of our racial injustices, is just staggering. And she, again, I just saw, maybe you did too, they're removing the Robert E. Lee statue from Charlottesville, right? Finally. But she asked this question of a Jewish woman, says, where are the memorials in Germany today to the Nazi past? She says, there aren't any, right? That the monuments are to the victims. And that is pretty powerful, thinking about what do we memorialize, what do we elevate, and how might they be also calls to injustice, or better, calls to justice. And I love in this photograph on the upper right, you have the previous foreign minister of Israel, Gabi Ashkenazi, with the foreign minister of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and US, having a tour of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. That's what you show people when you come to Germany. You don't take them on a tour of, Nazi war instruments. And I think, our past can inform in the present, and the text can do it, and the history can do it as well. I'm almost done. I want to just pull a few more. I love this in terms of injustice and hate. Brian Stevens says, get proximate. You change the narrative, stay hopeful and be uncomfortable. Look what Julian Edelman teaches. Such a powerful thing, right? Here you have Myers Leonard, a player on the Miami Heat, who said some pretty outrageous things about Jews, used the K word. And what did Julian Edelman do? He didn't call him out, he called him in. He invited him in. To relate, express anti-Semitic commitments, but sometimes you actually have to heal and bring them close. And Julian Edelman, who was one of the great players on the Patriots, but what a great reminder how to do this work. I'm just going to reflect on, I think a lot of my work, and I'm guessing that other teachers on the call here today also have gotten proximate. We just celebrated on the upper left, you may not recognize, that's Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, who one of the leaders of Chabad today. Rabbi Krinsky taught me about getting proximate. He invited me to a sicha, conversation, and they invited me to the Kines HaShluchim a couple of years ago. And when I got there, I figured it was like a bar mitzvah with 5,000 guests, and I figured I'd be sitting at one of the outlying tables, probably right near the door. So I picked up my little card, says Rabbi Rick Jacobs, J14. So I go to the J14, and every place has a name. And I'm a little bit surprised that I'm at Rabbi Krinsky's table. I'm even more surprised I'm sitting next to Rabbi Krinsky. Well, can I tell you that not 5,000 shluchim came up to Rabbi Krinsky, but a lot. I'm saying, felt like 1,000. And every single one, he said the following: do you know my friend, Rabbi Rick Jacobs? He didn't have to say my friend. He didn't have to say rabbi. He didn't have to sit me next to him. He taught we can break down. We don't have to agree with everyone, but if we can actually sit together. And by the way, that's one of the great Rabbi Asher Lopatin teachings that, I think many of us have learned that lesson beautifully from Asher. You may not know on the right, Tzipi Hotubeli, who then was the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, who had said some really harsh things about Reform Jews. And I was in Israel right before the pandemic. And I said, could we meet? I would love to have a conversation. And we did. It wasn't, everything rosy. We had a hard conversation, but we had a conversation. On the left, you can see the 10th president of Israel, President Reuven Rivlin, who just finished his term. What an amazing man. Started off really having a lot of hatred to the Reform movement. And I just wrote him a public letter and began a friendship. And what a beautiful teaching he taught all of, not just Am Yisrael, all the Jewish people, but all the citizens of Israel, about how you show up and are present for one another. Really, really powerful. Don't have much time, but I really wanted to include this little teaching from Eric Ward, who was one of our great teachers of how to build a more tolerant and a more just society by addressing racism head on. And for him, anti-Semitism is fundamental to that work. So I think the bottom piece is absolutely key. Anti-Semitism is more than a personal hatred of Jews. It's a worldview. And it sees world events as driven by a hidden intentional conspiracy led by Jews. This is Torah we learned and have taught. And yesterday we heard it over and over again, powerfully taught. I'll just conclude with a couple of images for us. Working on reparations. Right now, for the first time in years, decades, in the 80s, you have HR 40 brought, which is to study how could reparations be brought. And I know in the Jewish community, people say, reparations, that's so not something we can get behind. Well, let's just remember what happened with Nazi Germany. After the war, they stepped up with very dramatic reparations for Israel and for survivors. So what's our obligation today? Can that be one of our Jewish community's contributions to help? Not that it's for us to carry, but can we be working on that? Is that core to what it means to be a warrior for justice? I love this. This used to be our headquarters on Fifth Avenue. Sometimes you got to put your commitments in stone. They can't be washed away. They can't be on a placard or on a blackboard. And this is still, the building's still there. It's not where our offices are. And it's got the great quote from Micah. So if you ever walk to work and you worked in that building and you forgot what it is that we're doing, Micah would just tell you, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So last slide before we just do a lot of conversation. This is from the Haftarah from Yom Kippur morning, that we, kashofar rem kolecha, raise your voice like a ram's horn. And I always love that the shofar sometimes can sound like a human cry. Who are those voices today? I know, looking at the Zoom screen, some of you here today are those people who raise your voices like ram's horns. Ruth Bader Ginsburg sure did it. This is at commencement at Harvard Law School in 2011. And I would just hope that during the 9 days that lead up to Tisha B'Av, these are times for us to be, humble, reflective, but also finding our voices and understanding deeply what caused not just one temple to be destroyed, but two, and so many of the other horrific events. How do we create that world of wholeness and of justice and compassion that our tradition obligates us, not our Reform tradition, our tradition, all of ours. And what is it that we do that helps bring those days nearer to us? That to me is what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be a serious, committed Jew. And I hope that it's no longer something that we debate in the Jewish community, like, is social justice really a real thing for us? But how is it a real thing? Okay, how do we do it? That's a real thing. Let's debate that. But let's not for 1 minute miss its centrality in everything we do. So with that, I didn't see a lot of comments in, but we can open up to conversation, questions.
Beautiful. This has been so powerful, combining the traditional with the contemporary and the practical with the ethereal. So thank you so much. What I'd love to do, actually, because I'm sure we have a bunch of questions, if it's okay with you, Rabbi Jacobs, we'll hear from a number of folks with their questions, and you can just jot a few notes down, and then we'll hand the floor back to you if that works okay.
Perfect.
Great. Okay, friends, so feel free to unmute yourself, ask a question, and we'll put a number of voices in the room.
I have a question somewhat related. With Jews basically being considered persona non grata with most of the progressive social justice movements, how do we keep ourselves involved, and how do we get them to accept us and not see us as white supremacists, but as fellow justice warriors? You're also part of minority.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Someone else?
Hi, Rabbi Jacobs. You were my childhood rabbi at Westchester Reform. It's wonderful to see you again. After college, I launched, during college, launched a nonprofit that did college access in low-income communities, and I launched it with a grant from your rabbi's discretionary fund. So thank you. I'm now back at Westchester Reform. And my husband and I are actually working with Rabbi Blake to find ways to elevate Tikkun Olam at the temple. And the strategy that we've settled on is to create a position, a director of social impact at Westchester Reform. And I wondered if you had ideas for references, resources, role models that our congregation, a congregation like ours, which of course you know well, could use to make this a success.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, who else wants to jump in? Rav Asher.
Yeah, it's interesting. First of all, wow, this is such an honor to be on with you, Rabbi Jacobs, and thank you for your leadership. And I would love to hear, do you feel, and I pray for this, that, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, are one, and that we can really come together and on a message of social justice and in general? Or are you afraid that we're moving farther apart? I hope you have some good news, but I don't want to prejudice it, but love to hear your perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Rabbi Lopatin. Who else wants to jump in with a question? Don't be shy. Oh, yes, I see whoever is Prod 1 has their hand up. You want to unmute yourself? Maybe that's an accident then. Okay, someone else?
Hi, Amalia Haas here. Rabbi, thank you so much. This has just been such a blessing and a privilege to be part of this. I'm curious, with the degree of leadership on your shoulders and what's faced Am Yisrael in the world this past year, if you could speak to what has been sustaining and strengthening for you as you lead and sustain others.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Haas. Okay, someone else? That's already a lot, but let's see if there's another voice or two who want to jump in. Okay, there's also this question on the side I'm going to read for this person. Forgive me, I don't know who it is, but you said there's still debate playing out on whether social justice is part of Judaism. Can you talk more about how you've seen that emerge and play out? Okay, great. And unless there's another question, I guess the last one I would throw in is, how do we think about being both welcoming communities and also having boundaries, moral boundaries in welcoming communities? That is a challenge, I think, quite a bit about. On everyone is invited, everyone is included, and yet not everyone should be, perhaps, or not everything should be. So I know that's a little abstract and there's no answer to it, but it's something I'm grappling with. Okay, Rabbi Jacobs, back to you. So thank you so much. We've got 14 more minutes with you.
Wow, what phenomenal questions, and really what a privilege to be in this conversation. So the first question was, really posed as, are we as social justice advocates, are we not welcomed in progressive circles? And I know that I hear that said often. I actually find myself, and I think lots of my colleagues, welcomed in progressive spaces, and not by abandoning our Jewish commitment. I'll show up with my kippah on and be in sometimes, again, a gathering where it's a big tent and there are people who might not actually see us as welcome. But I have found that being in those spaces allows us sometimes to be able to impact some of the policies, some of the voices, some of the stances being taken. But I hear you very much that is something we are concerned about. But I think that the idea is that you therefore stay away. I'm not talking about showing up in the most hostile and physically menacing. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about being in coalitions with people who have different worldviews and maybe different views on core things, but show up and be that Jewish person of love and commitment. And I think also, I don't mean this to be overly agitational, but I was with a Jewish leader who said, why can't the Jewish community only fight anti-Semitism without and then said the second point was, and we need to have more allies in our fight against anti-Semitism. So I just raised my hand and said, those are two brilliant points. They actually argue with each other. And we need to, in a full-throated way, be able to address anti-Semitism, full stop. And if we don't show up for the racism that is literally killing our neighbors and the anti-Islamic, the Islamophobia, then frankly, we don't have a chance here. So I think, Lorna, my point is we have to show up in uncomfortable spaces. We don't have to risk our lives every moment by doing so, but I think we have to show up. And I think it also helps to temper those spaces, not always, but my experience is it often does. So it's sometimes challenging, but it's very needed. Jeannie, what a gift to show up at Valley Midrash and reconnect with you, and what amazing leadership. What Westchester Reform Temple has created, which is a position, a professional paid staff position about social impact, is phenomenal. I mean, I'd love this to be a whole new cohort. We have synagogue professionals doing engagement, education, of course, but working on how do you get more people to do the work, and also to do it across partisan lines, right? So people don't feel like, whoa. Social justice is always liberal. It's always progressive. It's not. It's about where does it come from? So I think why don't offline, Jeannie, let's reconnect, because I would love to give you a more full, and I know I'm already out there sharing your job description with people I think who could be great for you, because it would be fabulous. Rabbi Haas, sorry, I skipped over my teacher, Rabbi Escher. You want to know if there's a nechemta here. We have so many divisions tearing Jewish people apart. We have so many real issues, take ritual issues. Who is a Jew? Conversion, Jewish status issues. We have political issues. I actually think both things you said are true. We are coming apart, and we can build more sense of interdependence, interconnection. And I think it's also about showing up and learning. My teacher was Rabbi David Hartman. He inspired me to be a rabbi. He was an Orthodox philosopher, rabbi. I think the more we learn with one another, where do we find settings where we can actually be in real relationship? I remember my chevruta at the Young Israel of Scarsdale, Rabbi Jake Rubenstein of blessed memory. He called me up a month after I started at Westchester Reform Temple. He said, "Would you speak on Shabbat morning at our Orthodox synagogue?" And I thought to myself, "Ooh, I don't know this guy." And so I asked him, I said, "We're in Vayikra. Am I the korban? Am I going to be a sacrificial offering?" He said, No, I have a really great idea for how we're going to do it. I said, "Do you mind if I ask how we're going to do it ahead of time?" He said, "Oh yeah, here's my idea. You'll talk about what you love about Orthodox Judaism, and I'll talk about what I love about Reform Judaism." And I said, I feel badly I said what I'm about to share because I didn't know him. I said, "Well, will you have anything to share?" He said, "Oh yeah, and I'll go first." He spoke for a half an hour. His view of Reform Judaism was the most flattering thing I'd ever seen. I said, "If we were only what you think we are, God bless you." And then I spoke about what I love about Orthodox Judaism. I lived on Orthodox kibbutz, Rabbi. Like that was an unbelievable, powerful moment. Rabbi Asher, yesterday, Young Israel of Scarsdale and Westchester Reform Temple shared a bus to the rally. Okay, so those bonds were broken. On issues, certain issues, boy, we'd have a hard time, but there's love, there's connection, and it's not for everything, but let's find the places where we actually do galvanize us in more compelling ways, because we have to be that way. Rabbi Haas, I love your question. It's so wise, because this to me is why justice has to be rooted in spiritual practice, because otherwise we'll all be depleted in about an hour. Right? You go to a protest, you're raising your voice in some really hard communal debate, and it can absolutely just drain the holiness out of your body. So what is it for me? Prayer, study, meditation, and Shabbat. If I didn't have those things, I feel like I would have been, empty long ago. And communal experiences that fill us. That's why I say to people who only have social justice as their Jewish practice, say, "Oh no, you need the other parts so it fills you and renews you and sustains you." Otherwise, I don't think any of us can do this work for very long in the right spirit, right? So I think those are things that have nourished me, and I know they nourish many people. The last question is really part of that, the notion that there really is a debate going on. Believe me, there really is a debate going on. And I think the denigration of it is as follows. I think there are people who say, if that's all you do, it's not Jewish, because other groups do social justice, right? So what makes that Jewish? But, to me, it's understandable. And I think part of what people are saying is they don't want religious leaders only speaking in political voices. Like I always try to speak the Torah voice. Like that young woman who spoke at the Jewish Agency board meeting, she wasn't speaking a political voice. She cited text and history, and it lived inside of her in a very spiritual way. So I think part of it, we need to model, how do you raise an authentically Jewish voice for social justice, and how to anchor it in the text and in the history and in the communal norms. And I think that is a way that we can do it with authenticity. And I think what people say to denigrate it is they say, "Oh, well, that's just, kind of a superficial, it's like taking the political platform of the party you like and putting a Jewish star on it." I think actually it's not that. And if it seems like that, then maybe we're not doing it as authentically as we must. But can you imagine some of the giants of Jewish history and scholarship listening to that debate? I think they would cry. They would cry hearing us, even worrying that there's some authentic strand of it. So do I want Jews to have social justice and prayer? and study and act of kindness? Of course. But in my experience as a pulpit rabbi, most of us have our preferred ways we live. We have people who are just they're chesed people. They just, when they go visit people who are ill, they just have the gift. We have other people who are spiritual giants, prayer and meditation and spiritual. That's just who they are. And we have, Gidolei Hador who just learn. And we have people who are social justice warriors. And hopefully most of us have some of all of it. Maybe the dagesh is in another part of it, but that we cultivate all of it. And if somebody doesn't have social justice, I think it's incumbent upon us as Jewish people and as Jewish leaders to help grow that. That's a part of what it means to be a person of Jewish commitment. But I think the last thing I'll say there is the partisanship of this moment has made it ugly to be a social justice warrior, right? It leaves you with a very ugly set of scars because we don't engage in that work with the sensitivity and the depth of our tradition, which actually knows that there are different points of view legitimate. There's not a pro-genocide view that we need to consider, but on complex moral issues, there are many dimensions. And I think we have to be able to model that we don't take the partisanship of the public discourse into our communal debates. And we can actually model deep, respectful, commitments that are anchored on real values, and to use that language. That's the language that gives us power. Isaiah the prophet would be called a hopeless liberal today. I surely think so. And Jeremiah would be that crazy guy standing on the corner just screaming. But I think if some of those Nevi'im, would meet not just some of the warriors today, but to meet the Abraham Joshua Heschels of the world, the Avi Weisses of the world, right? I mean, Avi Weiss, also one of the great teachers on all of these aspects. And I know my predecessor, Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, who carried this large Sefer Torah when he marched. Can you imagine? I thought to myself, like, first of all, carrying a Sefer Torah, it's hot, it's a long, and he took the biggest Sefer Torah you could find. He wanted the people to see that the Torah wasn't just to be read in shul, it's a beacon of light for the world. So he carried it out into the world. What can we do to integrate our Jewish lives in powerful ways? I think, looking around, Rabbi Shmuley, you've done that so magnificently, in your the commentary on Jonah, your commentary on Pirkei Avot. I'm proud that the Central Conference of American Rabbis lovingly publishes these works. These are tools to help people acquire many, many dimensions and muscles for this work. And I also think, Rabbi Shmuley, you do it without any guardrails of like, oh, this is an Orthodox, this is a Reform. You have God's family in front of you, and your family literally is God's family. So I think we have to have more of our exemplars in our community where we can lift up these practitioners. And by the way, you don't have to be a rabbi to be a social justice warrior. Jeannie, what you're describing, my experience is the people often who are doing the most work there are not rabbis, people who are called to this work in powerful ways. I know I'm out of time. I just want to conclude by saying thank you for the invitation into this conversation. Thank you for your really wise and thoughtful gifts in this conversation. And let's continue. If you're not deputized to be a leader in this work, you now are. And we need all of us. And to raise our voices doesn't have to be raising a hateful voice. We can hate injustice and not hate anyone along the way, whether that be a basketball player in Miami or other people who are not exemplifying their best selves. So let's do the work. Let's get proximate with one another. Let's dig into this tradition. It obligates and restores us, Rabbi Haas. And in these 9 days, as we prepare for Tisha B'Av, let's anchor our world on these foundations of justice and goodness and chesed. That will be a world that will be able to sustain the cross currents of this very painful and difficult moment that we live in.
Amen. So inspiring, Rabbi Jacobs. You bring not only this force of goodness, but you really bring it, as I was chatting with a few folks just now, with respect and humility, and carry that menschlichkeit with such force, so powerful, on a plane all over the world for Am Yisrael and for justice for all people. And it's such an inspiring model for all of us. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for being with us. Thank you, Temple Solel, for your partnership today and beyond, Rabbi Linder, Rabbi Steele, Peter Pichko. Thank you. I see a few of our VBM board members here, Dr. Jackie Schenkine, Carol Zajcik, perhaps some others, and many rabbis here on the call. Thank you for being with us. Friends, next week we'll learn with Professor David Kaufman on Native American history, relationship to Jews. In 2 weeks, as CCAR was mentioned, Rabbi Hera Person will be here to learn with us as well, and many other opportunities. So thank you all for continuing to learn with us and put the learning into practice. And in these 9 days, as Rabbi Jacobs said, let's continue to build bridges, break down hate with love, and continue to talk together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
God bless. God
Be
bless.
well.